Welcome to You Have My Sword. Are you all ready to talk about dragons? Dragging these nuts around? Okay, I am sorry. I saw an opportunity and I took it. I am so sorry. Anyways, let's talk about it. We are talking about one of Middle-earth's most infamous dragons. He was the thickest boy and the first winged fire drake to take to the skies, albeit very briefly. We're talking about Ankalagon the Black. Ankalagon, also known as Ankalagon the Black, was the greatest of all winged dragons. In Sindarin, Ankalagon's name means rushing jaws and impetuous, which, fitting. He was bred by Morgoth during the First Age and was the largest dragon to have ever existed in Middle-earth, by large and far. He was one of Morgoth's most powerful servants, bred to be the mightiest of all dragons and the first of the winged fire drakes. Ankalagon was also known to be more powerful than even his ancestor Glaurung and was said to breathe the hottest fire. So not only was he the first of the fire drakes to take to the skies, my dude was spitting hot fire. His appearance in history was restricted to the War of Wrath, after Arendelle made his journey to Valinor to convince the Valar to overthrow Morgoth and rescue the overmatched and nearly defeated elves and Edain. The hosts of Valinor made war upon Morgoth and destroyed his armies. Remember, we talked about the hosts of Valinor in episode 8, What That Mouth Do, where the hosts of Valinor are essentially the Middle-earth Avengers. It's described that Ankalagon rose like a storm of wind and fire from the infernal pits of Angband beneath the Iron Mountains, as a last defense of the realm of Dor Daedaloth. Morgoth essentially birthed this mountain-sized dragon as a last defense in the War of Wrath. Imagine having that as your trump card in an argument. Near the end of the War of Wrath that pitted Morgoth's host against the host of the Valar, Morgoth sent Ankalagon to lead a fleet of winged dragons from the fortress of Angband to destroy the Dark Lord's enemies. So my boy Al brought his homies to jump the Middle-earth Avengers. Now, how do you think this went? Let's talk about it. So powerful was the assault of the dragon flight that the host of the Valar was driven back from the gates of Angband onto the ashy plain of Angfalith. Arendelle, also known as the Blessed, in his powerful elven airborne ship Vingalit, aided by Thorondor and the Great Eagles, battled Ankalagon and his dragons for an entire day. For context, Thorondor was the king of the eagles in the First Age. So, just to spell it out for you, we had dragons versus giant eagles and a man in Middle-earth's only known airship battling it out for 24 hours. If that isn't the sickest shit you've ever heard, I don't know what to tell you. So, the too long didn't read version here is, at length, Arendelle prevailed, casting Ankalagon upon the triple-peaked towers of Thingorodim, destroying both Ankalagon and the towers. With his last and mightiest defender slain, Morgoth was soon utterly defeated and made captive, thus ending the War of Wrath. Just like that. Easy clap. For context, Thingorodim was a group of 3 volcanic mountains in the Iron Mountains in the north of Middle-earth during the First Age. The highest peaks in Middle-earth, they were raised by Morgoth, who delved his fortress of Angband beneath them and far back into the Iron Mountains. There are a lot of instances in the Silmarillion where towers are referenced, but those towers actually mean mountains. So when people are like, the Silmarillion's hard to read, I'm like, yeah, no shit. It's fucking mad confusing. So just for context, if you ever dip your toes into the Silmarillion, a lot of towers are actually mountains, mountains are towers. You get it. Just, use your context. Okay. Anyhow, there is obviously so much more that goes into the Battle of the War of Wrath that will eventually dedicate an entire episode to it, but it's so sick to think the death of Ankalagon marked the official defeat of Morgoth. He pulled his dragon trump card, and that wasn't even enough. The Middle-earth Avengers said, fuck you, my guy. Okay, let's jump into some interesting fun facts regarding Ankalagon. So there are not one, but two extinct animals named after Ankalagon. In 1977, an extinct genus of worms from the Cambrian Burgess Shale was named Ankalagon. So yeah, I'm guessing Burgess Shale is a type of worm, and they found an extinct genus of it, and they go, yeah, let's name it after the dragon from Lord of the Rings. That's sick. And not even Lord of the Rings, the Silmarillion, which is like so niche. Anyways, and then in 1980, only a couple years later, an extinct genus of mammal was named Ankalagon. But this time they replaced the C with a K to kind of switch it up a bit. So let's talk about this mammal for a second. This shit is so wild. No pun intended. Ankalagon saronganathus is an extinct carnivorous mammal of the family Mesoschinidae. Listen, I don't know any of these fucking words. This is some deep science shit and I'm not high enough level for. Anyways, that's like the name of it, the like genus name, and then the family it belongs to. All I know is this motherfucker is old as shit. This Ankalagon was endemic to North America during the Paleocene epoch, or roughly 56 to 66 million years ago, existing for approximately 3.1 million years. That's fucking crazy. So this mammal was essentially a bear-sized bear dog. Does that make sense? Can you like picture it in your head? So a bear-sized bear dog. It had huge jaws and was a peak carnivore for its time. And the illustrations of what this thing probably looked like is so goofy. I will throw them up on the You Have My Sword Instagram for sure. Yeah, so that's interesting that two extinct prehistoric creatures were named after this dragon that is only mentioned in the Silmarillion once. But yeah, let's talk a little bit more about Ankalagon and his brief mention in the Silmarillion. It's crazy because he is such a pivotal character in the War of Wrath, and he really only gets like 5 minutes of screen time. Okay, let's talk about it. Ankalagon is mentioned in the Third Age, as Gandalf spoke of him as he told Frodo the true origin of his ring. So Gandalf says, and I quote, "It has been said that dragon fire could melt and consume the rings of power, but there is not now any dragon left on earth in which the old fire is hot enough, nor was there ever any dragon, not even Ankalagon the Black, who could have harmed the One Ring, the ruling ring, for that was made by Sauron himself." So, yes, that is very cool. I love how when things happen in the Third Age, they often reference, deep cut lore that happened in the First and Second Age. So those throwbacks are always really cool to me. It's just really cool world building. Now, the only mention of Ankalagon in later texts is in a note about the language of the Haladen, written in Tolkien's last years, and is cited as follows. "The language of the folk of Haleth was not used, for they had perished and would not rise again, nor would their tongue be heard again, unless the prophecy of Andreth the wise woman should prove true, that Turin, in the last battle, should return from the dead, and before he left the circles of the world, forever should challenge the great dragon of Morgoth, Ankalagon the Black, and deal him the death stroke." Okay, so I know that's probably very confusing. You're like, who are any of these people? What are these words? What are you saying to me? Now, Christopher Tolkien explains that this prophecy is in line with the different versions of the end of the world prophecies, as his father always used the term, quote unquote, last battle in regards to the apocalyptic event. However, he notices that the text later uses this term for the battle happening at the end of the Elder Days, despite that in all previous texts it was Arendelle who destroys Ankalagon in the War of Wrath. If this sounds confusing, it is. It absolutely is. But these later texts were just working theories or ideas that Tolkien had essentially created alternate endings. Once Tolkien passed and his family went through his belongings and tried to organize his writings, a lot of these alternate ideas or names and alternatives popped up. So while Tolkien published a very linear kind of story and built a very linear world as we knew it, he had other working names, working ideas, working endings that he either scrapped or didn't get around to using. Some of you may be wondering, how did a dude in an airship and some eagles, albeit very large eagles, defeat a mountain-sized dragon and his horde of smaller fire drakes? And to that I say, I have no idea. It's not explicitly stated in the Silmarillion, unfortunately. We just know that Arendelle cast him down, but a popular fan theory is that Arendelle had the power of a Silmaril to aid him, or that the eagles focused their attacks on Ankalagon's wings, eventually dropping him from the sky. Now, these are all just fan theories, by the way, as Tolkien is notorious for leaving lots of events vague. As well as leaving how magic works pretty vague to kind of keep the mystique and magic alive, which I understand. There is something innately more magical about not knowing exactly how something works rather than having something explained to death to you. Although, and here's a counterpoint, I am reading a fantasy series now called The Stormlight Archive, where the magic system is incredibly complex. And they slowly explain it more and more, and those slow reveals kind of add to how everything in the world works is kind of exciting. So I can kind of see how both sides of like knowing but not knowing can be engaging. Does that even make sense? I feel like I said so many words and none of them made sense. What I'm saying is the series that I'm reading now is doing a great job of a very intricate job of explaining the magic system, but slowly over time. So I think pace matters here. If something was explained to death to me straight away, that would kind of take the mystique away. You know, you want to learn or just not know in general is kind of what I'm getting at. But I like that Tolkien never touched on how magic works, you know, on Amon. I think that's cool. But I also like in the Stormlight Archive how, you know, book to book, we're learning more about how shit works. So I think pace is key here with this kind of stuff. But before we wrap up this episode, let's read a passage, because unlike many other figures of the First Age who are mentioned in The Lord of the Rings, we learn very little about Ankalagon and the Silmarillion. He appears only in the final chapter and is not even named until the moment he is killed by Arendelle. All right, let me take a sip of my coffee. This is a long one, lots of words. Okay, let's go. Then, seeing that his hosts were overthrown and his power dispersed, Morgoth quailed, and he dared not to come forth himself. But he loosed upon his foes the last desperate assault that he had prepared, and out of the pits of Angband there issued the winged dragons that had not before been seen, and so sudden and ruinous was the onset of that dreadful fleet that the host of Valar was driven back, for the coming of dragons was with great thunder and lightning and a tempest of fire. But Arendelle came, shining with white flame, and about Vingalit were gathered all the great birds of heaven, and Thorondor was their captain. And there was battle in the air all the day, and through the dark of night, no doubt. Before the rising of the sun, Arendelle slew Ankalagon the Black, the mightiest of the dragon host, and cast him from the sky. And he fell upon the towers of Thangoridim, and they were broken in his ruin. Then the sun rose, and the host of the Valar prevailed. And well nigh all the dragons were destroyed, and all the pits of Morgoth were broken and unroofed, and the might of the Valar descended into the deeps of the earth. This is from the voyage of Arendelle and the War of Wrath. So, that essentially encapsulates almost the entire battle. So it's crazy to have a character as pinnacle as Ankalagon the Black and as iconic as our boy Al, and he really only gets a couple paragraphs and isn't even mentioned by name until he dies. But with that concludes this episode, and shout out to everyone that joined me on Twitch while I researched and scripted this live. You can find me over on Twitch at twitch.tv/Krysti Pryde, where I make a lot of chainmail, talk token, fantasy in general, and sometimes script and record episodes live. Yes, I do play games, but I do a lot of just chatting shit primarily. As always, you can find me at youhavemyswordpodcast.com, where you can find our socials and Patreon. And if you support my Patreon or my coffee, you get access to the You Have My Sword Discord. And I really would love to have you there. It's a nightmare. Please join us. With that, thank you so much. So much. And as always, you have my sword.
Edgeworks Nebula.